The engagement ring caught the morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting tiny rainbows across the granite countertop as I stirred my coffee and watched Ethan flip through wedding magazines at our little breakfast table. 7 months to go, and I still couldn't quite believe this was real, that someone like Ethan Miller had chosen someone like me. "What about this one?" he asked, sliding a glossy page toward me. The venue was gorgeous, all stone archways and string lights draped between oak trees, the kind of place that belonged in fairy tales and Pinterest boards, the kind of place I dreamed about since I was 12 and started tearing pictures out of bridal magazines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I glanced at the price listed in tiny print at the bottom corner and felt my stomach clench. It's beautiful, but Ethan, look at the cost. Just for the ceremony space alone, not counting catering or flowers or... Hey, his hand covered mine, warm and steady. We talked about this, remember? Your grandmother's fund. That's exactly what it's for. My grandmother's fund. Even now, 3 years after she'd passed, thinking about it made my chest tight with a mixture of gratitude and grief. Margaret Hart had been the one person in my family who truly saw me, who believed I deserved beautiful things even when I couldn't believe it myself. She'd set up the wedding trust when I turned 25, pulling me aside at Christmas dinner to explain it with that mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Every girl deserves her dream wedding, Amelia," she'd said, pressing the bank documents into my hands. "And I know you'll use this money wisely when the time comes. You've got a good heart, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She'd made me promise not to tell anyone else in the family about the exact amount. "Let's keep this between us girls," she'd whispered with a conspiratorial wink. But she'd mentioned to my parents and Claire that she'd left me something for my future wedding. At the time, I was single and convinced I'd never need it. Now, watching Ethan's face light up as he pointed out features of different venues, I felt overwhelmed by her foresight and love. "I still can't believe she did that for me," I murmured, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. "She always said she wanted to make sure I had everything I needed for my special day." "She knew you'd find someone who'd appreciate you," Ethan said simply. "Someone who'd want to give you the wedding you deserve." That was the thing about Ethan. He never made grand romantic declarations or swept me off my feet with dramatic gestures. Instead, he loved me in quiet, steady ways that made me feel solid and secure for the first time in my life. Where Claire had always been the shooting star in our family, brilliant and demanding attention, I'd learned early to be the reliable moon, constant but easy to overlook. Ethan made me feel like I was worth looking at. We'd met at the accounting firm where I worked, him in IT and me processing invoices, and our first conversation had been about the coffee maker and the break room being broken. Nothing romantic or destined about it at all, just two people who ended up talking for 20 minutes about coffee preferences and somehow discovered we both loved hiking and terrible reality TV shows. 6 months later, he'd proposed during a camping trip in the mountains. No fancy restaurant or audience, just him and me and the sunset painting the sky pink and orange. "So, what do you think?" he asked, pulling up the venue's website on his laptop. "Should we schedule a tour?" I nodded, trying to push down the familiar voice in my head that whispered I didn't deserve something this beautiful. "Let me call the bank this week and check on the fund balance. I haven't looked at it in a while, and I want to make sure I know exactly what we're working with before we start making deposits." "Good idea. And Amelia," he reached across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, "whatever the amount is, we'll make it work. Even if we have to scale things back, the important thing is that we're getting married. The rest is just details." I loved him for saying that, for meaning it. But part of me, the part that had spent 29 years feeling like the consolation prize, wanted more than just making it work. I wanted to feel special, celebrated, worthy of something beautiful and memorable. Grandma Margaret understood that. She saw how I always stepped aside when Claire wanted something, how I'd learned to make myself smaller to avoid conflict, and she'd tried to give me one thing that was purely mine. "I should probably tell Claire we're looking at venues," I said, though the thought made my stomach knot slightly. She keeps asking about the wedding plans, and I know she's going to have opinions. Ethan's expression shifted just slightly, the way it always did when Claire came up. He was too polite to say anything outright, but I could tell he'd picked up on the dynamic between my sister and I. Claire was 32, 3 years older, and had never quite gotten over being the first grandchild, the first to hit milestones, the first to get married 5 years ago. My engagement had thrown her off balance in a way I'd never seen before, as if she couldn't quite figure out how I'd managed to get something before she did. The engagement ring caught the morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting tiny rainbows across the granite countertop as I stirred my coffee and watched Ethan flip through wedding magazines at our little breakfast table. 7 months to go, and I still couldn't quite believe this was real, that someone like Ethan Miller had chosen someone like me. "What about this one?" he asked, sliding a glossy page toward me. The venue was gorgeous, all stone archways and string lights draped between oak trees, the kind of place that belonged in fairy tales and Pinterest boards. The kind of place I'd dreamed about since I was 12 and started tearing pictures out of bridal magazines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I glanced at the price listed in tiny print at the bottom corner and felt my stomach clench. It's beautiful, but Ethan, look at the cost. Just for the ceremony space alone, not counting catering or flowers or... Hey, his hand covered mine, warm and steady. We talked about this, remember? Your grandmother's fund. That's exactly what it's for. My grandmother's fund. Even now, 3 years after she'd passed, thinking about it made my chest tight with a mixture of gratitude and grief. Margaret Hart had been the one person in my family who truly saw me, who believed I deserved beautiful things even when I couldn't believe it myself. She'd set up the wedding trust when I turned 25, pulling me aside at Christmas dinner to explain it with that mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Every girl deserves her dream wedding, Amelia," she'd said, pressing the bank documents into my hands. "And I know you'll use this money wisely when the time comes. You've got a good heart, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She'd made me promise not to tell anyone else in the family about the exact amount. "Let's keep this between us girls," she'd whispered with a conspiratorial wink. But she'd mentioned to my parents and Claire that she'd left me something for my future wedding. At the time, I was single and convinced I'd never need it. Now, watching Ethan's face light up as he pointed out features of different venues, I felt overwhelmed by her foresight and love. "I still can't believe she did that for me," I murmured, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. "She always said she wanted to make sure I had everything I needed for my special day. She knew you'd find someone who'd appreciate you, someone who'd want to give you the wedding you deserve." That was the thing about Ethan. He never made grand romantic declarations or swept me off my feet with dramatic gestures. Instead, he loved me in quiet, steady ways that made me feel solid and secure for the first time in my life. Where Claire had always been the shooting star in our family, brilliant and demanding attention, I had learned to be the reliable moon, constant but easy to overlook. Ethan made me feel like I was worth looking at. We'd met at the accounting firm where I worked, him in IT and me processing invoices, and our first conversation had been about the coffee maker in the break room being broken. Nothing romantic or destined about it, just two people who ended up talking for 20 minutes about coffee preferences and somehow discovered we both loved hiking and terrible reality TV shows. 6 months later, he'd proposed during a camping trip in the mountains. No fancy restaurant or audience, just him and me and the sunset painting the sky pink and orange. "So, what do you think?" he asked, pulling up the venue's website on his laptop. "Should we schedule a tour?" I nodded, trying to push down the familiar voice in my head that whispered, I didn't deserve something this beautiful. "Let me call the bank this week and check on the fund balance. I haven't looked at it in a while, and I want to make sure I know exactly what we're working with before we start making deposits." "Good idea. And Amelia." He reached across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "Whatever the amount is, we'll make it work. Even if we have to scale things back, the important thing is that we're getting married. The rest is just details." I loved him for saying that, for meaning it. But part of me, the part that had spent 29 years feeling like the consolation prize, wanted more than just making it work. I wanted to feel special, celebrated, worthy of something beautiful and memorable. Grandma Margaret understood that.
She'd seen how I always stepped aside when Claire wanted something, how I'd learned to make myself smaller to avoid conflict, and she tried to give me one thing that was purely mine. I should probably tell Claire we're looking at venues, I said, though the thought made my stomach knot slightly. She keeps asking about the wedding plans, and I know she's going to have opinions. Ethan's expression shifted, just slightly, the way it always did when Claire came up. He was too polite to say anything outright, but I could tell he'd picked up on the dynamic between my sister and I. Claire was 32, 3 years older, and had never quite gotten over being the first grandchild, the first to hit milestones, the first to get married 5 years ago. My engagement had thrown her off balance in a way I'd never seen before, as if she couldn't quite figure out how I'd managed to get something before she did.
Of course. I can schedule you an appointment with one of our trust specialists to review all the account activity. Would tomorrow morning work for you? Tomorrow morning. As if I could just continue with my regular day, process invoices and answer phones and pretend that my world hadn't just collapsed in the span of a 5-minute phone call? Yes, I said automatically. Yes, that would be fine. I'm so sorry about this confusion, Miss Hart. I'm sure we can help clarify the situation. Confusion. She called it confusion, as if this were some innocent mix-up instead of theft, instead of betrayal by the person who was supposed to love me most in the world after our parents. I hung up and sat in the break room's uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at my phone screen. The numbers from the morning's venue research were still pulled up in my browser. Ceremony fees, catering minimums, photography packages, numbers that had seemed manageable a few hours ago, exciting even, now looked impossibly huge and mocking. $47,000. Claire had taken $47,000. My hands fumbled as I tried to call Ethan, dialing wrong twice before I managed to get the number right. He answered on the second ring, voice warm and slightly distracted. "Hey, beautiful. How's your day going?" "Ethan." His name came out as barely a whisper. "Ethan, I need you to come home. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." "What happened? Are you hurt?" No, The money, the wedding fund, it's gone." Silence on his end, then. "What do you mean, gone?" "Claire took it. All of it. $47,000, Ethan. She took every penny. I'm coming home right now. Don't move. Don't do anything. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead, and I was alone again with the knowledge that everything I'd planned, everything I'd hoped for, had been stolen by my own sister. I thought about the venue photos still spread across our kitchen table, the excited conversation we'd had this morning about string lights and stone archways, the way Ethan's face had lit up when he talked about giving me the wedding I deserved. And I thought about Claire, my successful, confident, always gets what she wants sister, who apparently had decided that what she wanted was my grandmother's final gift to me. 2 days after the bank appointment that confirmed every horrible detail, Claire's invitation arrived via text, complete with party hat emojis and exclamation points. "Housewarming this Saturday, come see our dream home, 2 p.m., casual dress, can't wait to celebrate with family." I stared at the message for a long time, sitting in my car in the bank parking lot after reviewing every document, every signature, every piece of paper that proved my sister had systematically and legally stolen my wedding fund. The trust specialist had explained it all in gentle, apologetic tones, how the account had been structured to allow family access in emergencies, how Claire had presented documentation claiming I'd requested the withdrawal for family financial assistance, and how everything had been processed according to proper procedures. Proper procedures. Legal theft. "You don't have to go," Ethan said for the 5th time as we drove through Claire's new neighborhood Saturday afternoon. The houses here were massive, each one sitting on perfectly manicured lots with circular driveways and elaborate landscaping. My hands were shaking as we walked up the front path. Ethan took my elbow gently, steadying me. "Remember," he said quietly, "you don't owe her anything anymore." The front door was already open, warm light and laughter spilling out onto the porch. I could see Claire inside, radiant in a flowing sundress, gesturing animatedly as she spoke to a cluster of guests. She looked happy.
She looked successful and confident and absolutely glowing with pride. She looked like someone who'd never stolen $50,000 from her little sister. Amelia! She spotted me immediately, rushing over with her arms outstretched. Oh my God, you made it! I was worried you wouldn't come. I know you've been busy with wedding planning. The way she said it, so casual and bright, like she had no idea that she had destroyed every wedding plan I had made. Hello, Claire, I managed, letting her pull me into a brief hug that felt like sandpaper against my skin. And Ethan, come in, you have to see everything. Mark's out back grilling. He's been so excited to show off the yard. She grabbed my hand, tugging me toward the living room. We got the keys 3 weeks ago, and I've barely slept since trying to get everything perfect for today. 3 weeks ago, right around the time my bank account had been emptied, the house was stunning. I had to give her that. Hardwood floors, crown molding, furniture that looked like it had been lifted directly from a Pottery Barn catalog. Everything coordinated, everything expensive, everything perfect. In the living room, I could see my parents chatting with Mark's family, Dad holding a beer and looking uncomfortable in his good dress shirt, Mom pointing at architectural details with obvious appreciation.
The kitchen is my favorite part, Claire was saying, pulling me through the dining room. Wait until you see the island. It's custom marble, and the appliances are all professional grade. Mark keeps joking that we'll never be able to afford to eat out again after what we spent on this place, but honestly, it's worth every penny. Every penny, including mine. The kitchen was gorgeous. White cabinets, stainless steel everything, the kind of space where you could imagine hosting dinner parties and holiday gatherings. I could see price tags in my head, adding up the cost of the appliances, the countertops, the custom backsplash. This wasn't just about the down payment. This was about furnishing and decorating a showcase home. How did you manage all this so quickly? I heard myself asking. Last time we talked, you and Mark were still saving for a down payment. Claire's smile flickered for just a moment, so quickly I almost missed it. Oh, things just came together. Mark got that promotion last fall, and we'd been saving really aggressively. Plus, we had some family help. She met my eyes directly when she said it. No shame, no acknowledgement of what that family help actually meant. Family help, I repeated. Well, you know how these things work. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions about where money can do the most good right now versus later. She was still smiling, but there was something harder underneath it now, something calculating. I mean, it's not like you and Ethan need to get married tomorrow. You have plenty of time to save up. And honestly, those big, expensive weddings are kind of wasteful anyway. This is an investment that will appreciate over time. Ethan's hand found the small of my back, warm and steadying. I could feel the anger radiating off him, controlled but barely contained. Claire, I said carefully, we need to talk, privately. Of course, let me just check on the appetizers and then we can... Now. Something in my voice must have gotten through to her because she stopped mid-sentence, really looking at me for the first time since we'd arrived. I could see her processing my expression, the way I was standing, the tension rolling off both Ethan and me. Okay, she said slowly. Let's go upstairs. I was going to give everyone the full tour later anyway. We followed her up a curved staircase to the second floor, past what was obviously going to be a home office, and into the master bedroom. Claire closed the door behind us, and suddenly the casual party hostess mask slipped away completely. I suppose you found out about the trust account, she said, and there wasn't even a pretense of apology in her voice. You stole my wedding fund, I said, the words coming out flat and cold. $47,000 that Grandma left specifically for me. I didn't steal anything, Claire snapped. I was legally authorized to access that account, and I used the money for something important, something that benefits the whole family. It benefits you, your house, your down payment, your perfect showcase kitchen downstairs. And where do you think family Christmas will be held from now on? Where do you think Mom and Dad will come for grandkid sleepovers? This house isn't just for Mark and me. It's for all of us. It's an investment in the family's future.
The audacity took my breath away. She'd stolen my money and was actually trying to frame it as a favor to everyone? That money was for my wedding, I said, my voice shaking. Grandma set it up specifically for my wedding. She wanted me to have something beautiful, something special. And you took it. Amelia, be realistic. You and Ethan don't need $50,000 to get married. You can have a perfectly nice wedding for a fraction of that. Backyard ceremony, simple reception, just family and close friends. All that matters is that you're getting married, right? The rest is just showing off. Just showing off. I felt something crack open inside my chest. So when you spend $50,000 on marble countertops and professional-grade appliances, that's a wise investment. But when I want to spend money on my wedding, that's showing off? This is different. This is real estate. This is something that will last. And my marriage won't? Claire's expression shifted, becoming more aggressive. Look, what's done is done. The money's been spent, the house is bought. And honestly, you should be thanking me. Now you and Ethan will have to have a more reasonable, practical wedding instead of some overpriced fairy tale that you'll regret spending money on later. I stared at her, this woman who looked like my sister, but was saying things that made me feel like I was talking to a complete stranger. Where was the person who used to braid my hair when I was little, who'd let me sleep in her room when I had matemares, who'd promised we'd always be best friends no matter what? I trusted you, I whispered. My whole life I've trusted you, and you stole from me. I didn't steal anything, she said again, louder now. And if you're smart, you'll drop this whole victim act. What are you going to do? Sue me? Cause a huge family drama? Ruin relationships over money? That's not who you are, Amelia. You're better than that. But as she said it, I could see something else in her eyes. Something that looked almost like fear. Because maybe, for the first time in our lives, she wasn't entirely sure that I would just roll over and take it.
Maybe she was starting to realize that even quiet little Amelia had limits. And maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found mine. The law offices of Hartwell and Associates looked exactly like what you'd expect from a firm that had been handling family trusts since the 1960s. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books lining the walls, and the kind of heavy silence that made you want to whisper. I sat across from Eleanor Hartwell, the lawyer who had helped my grandmother set up the trust 4 years ago. Trying not to fidget with the folder of bank documents in my lap. "I'm so sorry for your loss, dear," Mrs. Hartwell said, adjusting her reading glasses as she pulled up my grandmother's file on her computer. She had to be pushing 70 herself, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and the kind of gentle authority that reminded me of Grandma Margaret. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, very thorough, very protective of her family." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The wedding trust she set up for me, my sister accessed it without my knowledge and withdrew all the funds. The bank says it was legal because she was listed as an authorized user, but I never gave her permission, and I definitely never asked her to take money for her house down payment." Mrs. Hartwell's eyebrows rose slightly. "Claire took money from your wedding fund for her own purposes?" $47,000. All of it. The words still felt surreal coming out of my mouth. She used it to buy her dream house and then tried to tell me I should be grateful because now I'll have a more practical wedding. Oh my. Mrs. Hartwell was quiet for a moment, typing something into her computer. "Let me pull up the complete trust documentation. Your grandmother was very specific about the terms when we drafted this." She clicked through several screens, occasionally making small humming noises that could have meant anything. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for her to confirm what the bank had already told me, that everything Claire had done was perfectly legal, that I had no recourse, and that my grandmother's final gift to me was simply gone. "Here we are," Mrs. Hartwell said finally,
and something in her tone made me sit up straighter. "Oh, Margaret, you clever woman. What do you mean?" She turned her computer screen toward me, pointing to a section of legal text that looked like gibberish to my untrained eye. "Your grandmother included what we call a misappropriation clause in the trust. She was very concerned about protecting your interests, especially given some of the family dynamics she mentioned during our consultations." Family dynamics? She was quite fond of Claire, mind you, but she was also very aware of your sister's, let's say, assertive nature. Margaret specifically mentioned that she wanted to ensure no one could take advantage of your generous spirit. She said, and I quote, "Amelia gives too much of herself away. I want this money to be hers and hers alone, no matter what anyone else thinks they're entitled to." My throat tightened. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma was still trying to protect me. I managed to ask, "What exactly does the clause say?" "In simple terms, if any authorized user withdraws funds from the trust for purposes other than your direct benefit without your explicit written consent, the trust is considered breached. When that happens, the full amount of the misappropriated funds plus any assets purchased with those funds automatically reverts to your ownership." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" "If Claire used your wedding money to purchase property and you didn't consent to that use, then legally speaking, you now have claim to that property equal to the amount she took." "You mean her house?" "The portion of it purchased with your money, yes, which, if she used the full amount for the down payment as you've described, would likely represent a significant ownership stake." Mrs. Hartwell leaned back in her chair, steadying my face. "Your grandmother was quite insistent on this provision. She said she'd seen too many family members take advantage of each other's generosity and call it love." The room felt like it was spinning slightly. Claire's beautiful house, the one she'd shown off so proudly just days ago, the marble countertops and professional-grade appliances she'd claimed as symbols of her success, legally, I might own part of it. Maybe a big part of it. What would I need to do? I heard myself asking. Well, first we'd need to document the breach, send official notice to Claire and her husband that the trust has been violated and that you're asserting your rights under the misappropriation clause. Then we'd likely need to have the property appraised to determine the exact value of your claim. And if she refuses to acknowledge it? Mrs. Hartwell's smile turned slightly steely. Then we'd file a civil suit and let the court sort it out. But honestly, dear, given how thoroughly your grandmother documented her intentions, I don't think it would come to that. The law is quite clear on this type of situation. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. Claire thought she'd won, thought she'd outmaneuvered quiet little Amelia once again. She'd spent the weekend showing off her dream house, acting like she'd pulled off some brilliant financial strategy, completely unaware that Grandma Margaret had anticipated exactly this scenario.
"There is one thing you should consider," Mrs. Hartwell said gently. "Enforcing this clause will likely create significant family tension. Your sister may not respond well to discovering that her actions have legal consequences." "She stole my wedding fund," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. She looked me in the eye and tried to tell me I should be grateful for it. What kind of family tension is worse than that? Mrs. Hartwell nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother would be proud to hear you say that. She always worried that you were too willing to sacrifice your own happiness to keep others comfortable." "She was right," I admitted. "But maybe it's time I stopped doing that." "Indeed. Shall I prepare the documentation to notify Claire of the trust breach?" I thought about Claire's face at the housewarming, the way she'd dismissed my pain so casually, the way she'd tried to make me feel selfish for wanting my own money for my own wedding. I thought about Ethan, patient and supportive, but quietly furious on my behalf.
I thought about all the times I'd stepped aside, made myself smaller, let Claire have what she wanted to avoid conflict. And I thought about Grandma Margaret, wise enough to see this coming, loving enough to protect me even after she was gone. Yes, I said. Prepare the documentation. The drive home from the lawyer's office felt surreal, like I was floating somehow outside my own life, watching someone else navigate the familiar streets of our neighborhood. Ethan kept glancing at me from the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "So let me make sure I understand this," he said as we pulled into our driveway. "Your grandmother basically booby-trapped the trust fund?" "She protected it," I corrected, though I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. "She wanted to make sure no one could take advantage of me. And now you could potentially own part of Claire's house, if I choose to enforce it." I stared at our front door, trying to imagine walking inside and resuming normal life after learning I had this kind of power over my sister. Mrs. Hartwell said, I don't have to do anything. I could just let it go. Ethan turned off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. "Is that what you want to do?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Part of me, the part that had spent 29 years avoiding confrontation, wanted nothing more than to pretend this conversation had never happened. To go back to planning a smaller, simpler wedding and let Claire keep her dream house and her sense of moral superiority. But there was another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger since the moment I'd learned about the theft, that was tired of being the family doormat. "I don't know," I said honestly. "On one hand, she's my sister. She's family. The idea of potentially forcing her out of her house feels like justice," Ethan suggested quietly. "Like revenge, and that doesn't feel like who I am." We went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd been looking at wedding venues just a week ago, back when life felt simple and hopeful. The wedding brochures were still there, mocking us with their glossy promises of fairy tale weddings and perfect days. "Can I say something?" Ethan asked, reaching across the table to take my hands. "And I want you to really hear me, not just dismiss it like you usually do when someone tries to defend you." I nodded, though I could feel my automatic defensive responses already kicking in. "Claire didn't just take your money, Amelia. She stole your trust. She betrayed you in the most fundamental way possible, and then she tried to make you feel guilty for being hurt about it. That's not sister behavior. That's not family behavior. That's predatory behavior." "She's not a predator. She's just self-centered, entitled, used to getting her way at your expense." He squeezed my hands. "When was the last time Claire sacrificed something she wanted so you could have something you wanted?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't think of a single example. Not one. "She took your grandmother's final gift to you," Ethan continued. "Money that was specifically set aside to make sure you had something beautiful and special for one of the most important days of your life. And she used it to buy herself a house. How is that not predatory?" "Because she's family," I said weakly. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. "So are you. You're her family too. Where was her concern for your feelings, your wedding, your happiness?" He let go of my hands and leaned back in his chair. "I love you, Amelia, but you have to stop making excuses for people who hurt you just because they share your DNA." The words hit harder than I expected, partly because I knew he was right. I'd been making excuses for Claire's behavior my entire life, telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. If I enforce the clause, ruin our relationship forever? What relationship? Ethan asked bluntly. The one where she takes whatever she wants and you pretend to be okay with it? The one where she gets to be successful and ambitious while you get to be understanding and accommodating? What exactly would you be losing?
I wanted to argue with him, to defend Claire, to insist that despite everything, she loved me and I loved her. But sitting there in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my own dreams deferred once again for someone else's benefit, I couldn't find the words. I'm scared, I admitted finally. I'm scared of becoming the kind of person who would take her sister's house. You're not taking her house, Ethan said firmly. You're reclaiming what was stolen from you. There's a difference. Is there? He got up and walked around the table, pulling me into his arms. Your grandmother saw this coming, Amelia. She knew Claire well enough to put protections in place. She knew you well enough to know you'd need someone to give you permission to protect yourself. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent, trying to find some solid ground in the chaos of my emotions. What would you do if it were your sister? I'd enforce the clause, he said without hesitation, and then I'd probably never speak to them again. Just like that? Just like that. Because family shouldn't steal from family, and love shouldn't come with the requirement that you accept being treated badly. We stood there in our kitchen, holding each other, while I tried to imagine a world where I was brave enough to stand up to Claire, where I valued my own happiness enough to fight for it. It felt foreign and terrifying and somehow necessary all at once. What if she hates me? I whispered. What if she respects you for the first time in your life? He countered. That possibility, that Claire might actually respect me if I showed some backbone, was almost more frightening than her potential hatred. Because it would mean admitting that I'd spent 29 years earning nothing but her contempt through my constant accommodation. I need to think about this, I said, pulling back to look at his face. Of course, but while you're thinking, remember something. Your grandmother loved you enough to anticipate this exact scenario. She trusted you to be strong enough to use the tools she left you. Maybe it's time to trust her judgment. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about trust and betrayal, and the difference between being kind and being a doormat. Somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear Grandma Margaret's voice, gentle but firm. You've got a good heart, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, but don't let them take advantage of it either. By morning, I'd made my decision. Claire's reaction to the legal notice was everything I'd expected and worse. The doorbell rang at 7:30 in the morning, 3 days after Mrs. Hartwell had sent the official notification of trust breach. I was barely awake, shuffling to the kitchen in my robe to start coffee, when the aggressive pounding started. Not knocking, pounding, like someone was trying to break down the door. Ethan was already up and dressed for work, and he beat me to the front door, peering through the peehole before turning back to me with a grimace. It's Claire, and she looks furious. I could hear her voice through the door, high and sharp. I know you're in there, Amelia. Open this door right now. Maybe I should, I started, but Ethan shook his head firmly. No, you don't owe her immediate access to your house just because she's upset. He opened the door partway, keeping himself between Claire and me. Good morning, Claire. It's pretty early for social calls. Get out of my way, she snapped, trying to push past him. I need to talk to my sister. She's right here, he said calmly, not moving. You can talk to her from where you are. I could see Claire over his shoulder, and she looked like a completely different person from the glowing hostess at her housewarming party. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she was wearing yesterday's clothes, and her face was blotchy with anger and what might have been tears.
How could you do this to me? She demanded, waving the legal papers in the air. How could you try to take my house, my home? I'm not taking your house, I said, proud that my voice stayed steady. I'm reclaiming money that was stolen from me. Stolen? I didn't steal anything. That money was just sitting there, not being used, and Mark and I had an opportunity that couldn't wait. I was going to pay it back. When? When were you going to pay back $47,000? And why didn't you ask me first? Because I knew you'd say no. You'd have some long discussion about it, and we needed to move fast on the house. The market was crazy competitive. And so you took it without asking because you knew I'd say no. Do you hear yourself right now? Claire's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment I saw a flash of the sister I'd grown up with, the one who used to comfort me during thunderstorms. Amelia, please, you have to understand. This house, it's everything Mark and I have worked for. It's our future, our security. We can't lose it. And my wedding fund was my future and my security. Did you think about that when you took it?
Your wedding can happen without $50,000. You don't need some extravagant fairy tale celebration to get married. You and Ethan love each other. That's what matters, right? So why does your house matter more than my wedding? The question hung in the air, and I watched Claire struggle for an answer that wouldn't reveal the ugly truth, that she'd always believed her dreams were more important than mine. This is different, she said finally. This is an investment. This is practical. This is my money, I said firmly. Money that you took without permission. Fine. Claire's composure shattered completely. Fine, I took it without asking, but you can't seriously be considering this legal nonsense. You can't actually want to destroy your own sister's life over money. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to understand that I am not your personal bank account. What consequences? You want me and Mark to lose our house? You want us to be homeless? I want you to take responsibility for what you did. Behind Claire, I could see Mark getting out of their car, his face grim. He walked up the front path slowly, like a man heading to his own execution. Claire, come on. Let's go home and figure this out. No! She whirled on him. This is our home we're talking about, our life together. Are you just gonna let her take it? Mark looked at me, and I was surprised to see something that looked like shame in his eyes. She's not taking anything, Claire. She's taking back what was hers to begin with. Whose side are you on? Claire demanded. I'm on the side of not building our life on stolen money. I'm on the side of being able to sleep at night. The admission hit Claire like a physical blow. She staggered slightly, looking back and forth between Mark and me, like she couldn't process that neither of us was backing down. You're all ganging up on me, she said, her voice breaking. My own family is ganging up on me over money. No one's ganging up on you, I said, feeling suddenly exhausted. But I'm not going to pretend this is okay anymore. I'm not going to smile and nod and make excuses for you taking what isn't yours. So what happens now? Mark asked quietly. What do you want from us? I looked at Mrs. Hartwell's papers still clutched in Claire's shaking hands and thought about my grandmother's wisdom, her foresight, her determination to protect me even after death. I thought about 29 years of stepping aside, making myself smaller, letting Claire have whatever she wanted to keep the peace. I want the money back, I said simply. All of it. And I want an apology. A real one. And if we can't pay it back right away? Mark asked quietly. Then we'll work with the lawyers to figure out what my legal claim to the house actually means. Claire let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything we've been through together, after being sisters our whole lives, you're choosing money over family? No,
I said, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I felt completely calm. You're the one who chose money over family. You chose your dreams over my trust, your comfort over my happiness. I'm just refusing to pretend that's okay. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing this new version of her little sister, the one who didn't automatically back down, who didn't apologize for taking up space, who didn't prioritize everyone else's feelings over her own. "This isn't over," she said finally. But the threat sounded hollow, defeated. "Yes, it is. The old version is over. Whatever comes next, it starts with you taking responsibility for what you did." As they walked back to their car, Mark's arm around Claire's shaking shoulders, I realized something fundamentally changed, not just between Claire and me, but inside me. For the first time in my life, I had chosen my own well-being over someone else's comfort. And despite the chaos, despite the tears and accusations and family drama, I felt lighter than I had in years. Dad showed up at my office during lunch break, looking uncomfortable in his good khakis and button-down shirt, the ones he usually reserved for church and parent-teacher conferences back when Claire and I were kids. I could see him through the break room window, standing awkwardly near the reception desk while our secretary pointed him in my direction. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, settling into the plastic chair across from me with a heavy sigh. "We need to talk." I'd been expecting this conversation ever since Claire's meltdown 3 days ago. Dad hated conflict more than anyone I ever met, and the idea of his daughters locked in a legal battle probably hadn't let him sleep since he heard about it. "Let me guess," I said, unwrapping my sandwich without much appetite. "Claire called you crying, and now you're here to convince me to drop the whole thing for the sake of family harmony." His weathered face creased into familiar lines of worry. "She's devastated, Amelia. I've never seen her like this. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. Mark says she just sits in that house staring at the walls, convinced you're going to force them out onto the street." "I'm not forcing anyone anywhere," I said quietly. "I just want my wedding fund back."
But honey, they use that money for the down payment. They can't just write you a check for $50,000 tomorrow. You know that. I took a bite of my sandwich, chewing slowly while I watched my father fidget with his coffee cup. He looked older than I remembered, grayer around the temples, more tired. The weight of trying to keep peace between his daughters was wearing on him. "Do you remember what Grandma used to say about me?" I asked finally. Dad's expression softened. "She said a lot of things about you. She adored you. She used to tell me I had a good heart, but that I needed to learn when to stop giving it away." I met his eyes directly. She knew Claire would do something like this eventually. That's why she put that clause in the trust. "Your grandmother loved both of you girls, but she knew which one of us needed protecting," I interrupted. "Dad, be honest with me. How many times in my life have you asked Claire to step aside so I could have something I wanted?" The question hung between us, and I watched him struggle with the answer we both knew. Never. Not once in 29 years had Claire been asked to sacrifice anything for my benefit. "That's different," he said weakly. "Claire's always been more assertive. She goes after what she wants. And I've always been more accommodating, more willing to let others go first, take less, make do." I leaned forward, my voice steady but firm. "But this time, Dad, I'm not backing down. This time I'm going after what I want." His shoulders sagged. "What about family, sweetheart? What about forgiveness? What about accountability?" I countered. "Claire stole from me. She betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible, and instead of apologizing, she's trying to make me feel guilty for being hurt about it. When does she have to face consequences for her choices? She's your sister, and I'm her sister too. Where was her concern for our relationship when she was emptying my bank account?"
Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it might contain answers. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression, a reluctant recognition that made my chest tight. "You sound like your grandmother," he said softly. "She used to get that same look in her eye when someone was trying to take advantage of family." Maybe I should have listened to her sooner. The phone call started that evening and didn't stop for 3 days. Claire called my cell, my work number, even tried Ethan's phone when I stopped answering mine. Her messages ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations to desperate bargaining attempts that revealed just how panicked she had become. "Amelia, please, I know I made a mistake. I should have asked first. I should have talked to you. But please don't destroy my marriage over this. Mark is starting to look at me like I'm some kind of criminal." The next message was different, sharper. "You know what? Fine. Maybe I did take the money without asking, but I'm your sister. I've been there for you your entire life. Remember when Tommy Martinez broke up with you senior year and I drove 2 hours just to bring you ice cream? Remember when you were too scared to apply for your job and I practically filled out the application for you? This is how you repay me?" By the third day, desperation had fully set in. "I'll find a way to pay you back, I swear. Mark is looking into a second mortgage. Maybe we can refinance something. Just please don't take my house. Please don't make me lose the first thing I've ever been really proud of." I saved every message, played them to Mrs. Hartwell, who listened with the patient expression of someone who'd seen this pattern many times before. Classic manipulation cycle. Guilt, anger, bargaining. What she's not doing is taking actual responsibility or offering concrete solutions. That afternoon, Claire showed up at my house again, but this time she was alone. Through the window, I could see her sitting in her car for nearly 20 minutes before she finally worked up the courage to approach the door. When I opened it, she looked smaller somehow, deflated. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Please, just to talk?" I let her into the living room, but didn't offer coffee or try to make her comfortable. We sat across from each other like strangers. The silence stretched until she finally broke. "I keep trying to figure out when everything went wrong between us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We used to be so close." "We were close when it was convenient for you, when you needed support or validation or someone to make you feel better about yourself. But we were never close when it mattered to me." "That's not true. Name one time you sacrificed something you wanted so I could have something I wanted." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched on. "I can't lose this house, Amelia. It's not just about the money anymore. Mark is questioning everything about our relationship, our future, whether he can trust me. If I lose the house too," she trailed off, tears starting to flow. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you stole from me."
"I didn't think of it as stealing," she said desperately. "I thought of it as borrowing from family. I thought you'd understand eventually. Without asking me? Without even telling me? Because I knew you'd say no." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest and damning. "So you knew it was wrong," I said quietly. "You knew I wouldn't consent, so you just took it anyway." Claire's face crumbled. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. But pity wasn't enough to make me back down. "Yes," I said simply. "You have." The family meeting was Dad's idea, a last-ditch attempt to get everyone in the same room and work this out like adults. We gathered in my parents' living room on a gray Sunday afternoon, me and Ethan on the couch, Claire and Mark in the chairs by the window, Mom and Dad hovering nervously like referees at a boxing match they didn't want to witness. "I think we can all agree that this situation has gotten out of hand," Dad began, using his best mediator voice. "We're family. We should be able to find a solution that works for everyone." "The solution is simple," I said calmly. "Claire returns the money she took, and we can all move on." "It's not that simple," Mark said quietly. "The money's tied up in the house now. The down payment, the closing costs, some of the renovations.
We'd need time to figure out how to liquidate that much cash. How much time? Ethan asked. Mark and Claire exchanged glances. 6 months? Claire said hopefully. Maybe a year? A year to steal $50,000, but a year to pay it back? I shook my head. That's not how this works. What do you want from us? Claire exploded, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. You want me to sell the house? Lose everything we've worked for? Destroy our credit? Ruin our marriage? What exactly will make you happy, Amelia? I want you to take responsibility for what you did. Fine, I take responsibility. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I took your precious wedding fund. I'm sorry I didn't ask permission. I'm sorry I assumed my own sister might care more about my happiness than some overpriced party. Are you happy now? The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone stared at Claire as her words echoed in the room, revealing exactly what she really thought about my wedding, my dreams, my right to make my own choices about my own money. There it is, I said softly. That's what you really think, isn't it? That my wedding is just some overpriced party. That your house is more important than my happiness. That you're entitled to my money because you're more successful, more ambitious, more deserving. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Mom, who had been silent through the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Claire Elizabeth Hart, I am ashamed of you. We all turned to stare at her. Mom never took sides, never raised her voice, never did anything to upset the family equilibrium. You stole from your sister. You took money that your grandmother specifically saved for Amelia's wedding, and then you had the audacity to try to make her feel guilty about being upset about it? That is not how we raised you. Mom, Claire started, but Mom held up her hand. I'm not finished. Your grandmother left that money for Amelia because she knew, we all knew, that you would take and take and take until there was nothing left for anyone else. She tried to protect her, and you proved her right. The room fell silent, except for Claire's crying. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up. You have 30 days to return the full amount of the wedding fund, or I'm exercising my legal right to claim ownership of the portion of your house that was purchased with my money. Mrs. Hartwell has already had the property appraised. Based on the down payment amount and current market value, I'd own approximately 40% of your house. 40%? Mark looked like he might be sick. 40%, which means I'd have the right to force a sale and claim my portion of the proceeds. Or we could work out some other arrangement, but that would require good faith negotiation from both of you. Claire looked around the room desperately, seeking support that wasn't coming. Dad looked defeated, Mom looked disappointed, and Mark looked resigned. 30 days, I repeated. And Claire, the next time you decide to help yourself to something that doesn't belong to you, remember this moment. Remember that even quiet little Amelia has limits. As we walked to our car, Ethan squeezed my hand. How do you feel? I thought about it, taking inventory of my emotions. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that felt like solid ground under my feet for the first time in years.
Free, I said finally. I feel free. 6 weeks later, I stood in the middle of Grandview Gardens, the venue from that first magazine photo Ethan had shown me months ago, watching the coordinator point out where we could place the altar beneath the oak trees. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows across the stone pathways, and I could almost see it, the chairs arranged in perfect rows, the string lights twinkling overhead, the moment I dreamed about since I was 12 years old. The deposit cleared this morning, the coordinator was saying, her smile warm and professional, and I have to say, couples who pay their deposits in full up front always seem to have the most magical weddings. Ethan squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with something that looked like pride. She deserves magical, he said simply. 28 days after my ultimatum, Claire had shown up at my door with a cashier's check for $47,862.34. No drama this time, no tears or accusations or attempts at manipulation. She'd looked older somehow, quieter, like someone who'd finally been forced to see herself clearly and hadn't liked what she'd found. I had to take out a loan against Mark's 401k, she'd said, handing me the check without meeting my eyes, and we're refinancing the house to pay that back. It's going to take us years to recover financially. I'm sorry to hear that, I'd replied, and meant it. But those are consequences you created for yourself. She'd nodded slowly, like someone finally accepting a difficult truth. I know that now. She'd paused at my front door, her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Amelia, I really am sorry. Not just for taking the money, but for everything. For making you feel like you didn't matter as much as I did. For treating your dreams like they were less important than mine. It wasn't the apology I'd dreamed of receiving my whole life. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tears and hugs and promises that everything would be different now. But it was real, honest, and maybe that was worth more than the fairy tale version I'd imagined. Thank you, I said simply. That means something. Now, walking through the venue that would host our wedding in 4 months, I felt the weight of that moment settle into something like peace. Claire and I weren't close anymore, might never be close again, but the desperate, anxious need to earn her approval had finally died. In its place was something steadier, more sustainable, respect for myself and clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept from others. Have you decided on flowers yet? The coordinator asked, pulling out her tablet to make notes. Peonies, I said without hesitation. White and blush pink peonies. My grandmother loved them. Perfect choice. And the menu? Whatever makes us happy, I said, laughing at how simple that sounded, how revolutionary it felt to prioritize my own preferences without worrying about what anyone else might think. That evening, Ethan and I sat in our kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole nightmare had begun, going through wedding planning details with an excitement that felt pure and uncomplicated. No more anxiety about budgets, no more worry about family drama, no more making myself smaller to accommodate other people's expectations. You know what I realized today? I said, looking up from the florist catalog. This is the first time in my life I've planned something big without asking for Claire's opinion first. How does that feel? I considered the question, taking inventory of my emotions the way I'd learned to do over the past months. Scary, I admitted, but also right. Like I'm finally living in my own life instead of the margins of everyone else's. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Dinner Sunday? Just the 4 of us. Dad's making his famous lasagna. 4 of us, not 6 of us. Claire and Mark were slowly being integrated back into family gatherings, but carefully, with new boundaries and expectations that I'd helped establish. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. You've changed, Ethan observed, watching me type back a response to Mom. Have I? You take up space now. You speak up when you want something. You say no when you don't. You've stopped apologizing for existing. He was right. Somewhere in the process of fighting for my wedding fund, I discovered something I'd never known I possess. The unshakable conviction that I deserved good things, that my dreams mattered, that love shouldn't require me to make myself invisible. Grandma Margaret would be proud, I said softly, touching the engagement ring that caught the kitchen light just like it had that first morning when everything seemed simple and hopeful. She is proud, Ethan corrected. Wherever she is, she's proud of the woman you became. Outside, the sun was setting, painting our small house golden with promise. In 4 months, I'd walk down an aisle lined with peonies toward the man who'd helped me find my voice.
surrounded by people who loved me enough to want me to be happy, funded by a grandmother who loved me enough to protect my happiness even after she was gone. For the first time in my life, I felt like the main character in my own story. And the story, I realized with a smile, was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.